crucial. Well, we have natural beliefs as well about memory. Any of you doubt that I just said that? No, you naturally believe because you remember that I said it. You see. Natural beliefs about human freedom. Natural beliefs about moral principle. These are rooted in the human constitution, in the proclivities. It's an interesting word. In the proclivities of human nature. And you may recall that's the very word that David Hume uses when he's talking of moral psychology. The proclivities. In fact, this morning I was reading Keith Yandel's book on David Hume's philosophy of religion. And he has a whole chapter dealing with the proclivities of human nature in David Hume. Because while Hume says, in effect, that the self is simply a bundle of mutually independent and isolated ideas, perceptions, and impressions, with no underlying mind or soul substance that we can know of. Yet paradoxically, he also says that human nature has certain natural tendencies that persuade us. It's curious. There's no relationship between the bits and pieces in the consciousness, but somehow or other we join them together in certain standard ways. You see, Yandel argues that that's an inconsistency in Hume. He's got two different views of the self that don't belong together. Well, what Reid is doing is then building on this notion of human proclivities. Yes, rooted in the human constitution, by virtue of which we don't see relationships between atomistic, discrete ideas, but by virtue of which we achieve beliefs in a natural process. And you can even say that for him, these are necessary beliefs. They are necessarily true. Now, the word necessary in this case seems to mean something like psychologically necessary. Given human psychology, you cannot help but believe certain things, psychologically necessary, which is different, is it not, from the notion of what is logically necessary, where a necessary truth in the logical sense is one whose only alternative, the contradiction of it, is self-contradictory and therefore false. So if the alternatives are A or non-A, and non-A turns out to be self-contradictory and therefore false, then, of logical necessity, A is true. You see, that would be a logically necessary truth. Now, the interesting thing is that G.E. Moore, who picks up on this right after 1900, he maintains that these natural beliefs are logically necessary. Why? Because the contradiction of them is self-contradictory. How come? Well, take, for instance, that guy that I mentioned last time, who said that time is unreal. Okay? Time is unreal. He contradicts that every time he says, I've got to do something before I do something else. It's a self-contradictory view. Moore calls it the paradox that philosophers are constantly denying by what they do the things that they say. Which sounds very much like Thomas Reid, does it not? The contradiction is between theory and practice. If you believed what you say, then you wouldn't act that way. And so the claim is that that contradiction makes it a logically necessary truth. It's never been very favorably received by people who are not realists, but some people, understandably, will think that there is some slip of categories going on there, mixing the practical and the theoretical. All right, so we have then these natural or common sense beliefs. Listen to what Reid says about your friend Descartes. A man like Descartes who doubts his own existence, remember meditation 1, is surely as unfit to be reasoned with as a man who believes that he's made of glass. There may be disorders in the human frame that produce such extravagances, but they'll never be cured by reasoning. Now, you know, in addition to the sort of ad hominem remarks, and in addition to the sense of humor, the obvious point is that if you think you don't exist, there's something that's not functioning right. You see? You've got some psychological problem. Your natural proclivities are misfiring. You see? Because natural beliefs are spontaneous, they're not voluntary. They're spontaneous interpretations of experience. So that when you have a sensation, a physical sensation, it's a sign to you that there is some material object around. And so belief in the thing signified is a natural, spontaneous kind of reaction, response. Now you see what's happening there makes it sound like behavioristic stimulus response mechanisms. So that the nature of direct awareness is such that, if that's the I, okay, there's a stimulus, sensation, okay, which immediately produces response, affirming that something's there. You didn't blink, you were supposed to. Because your blink would affirm the recognition of something there. Okay. I'll do it a little better next time. Now, while Reid, of course, is pre-behavioristic psychology, after the development of behavioristic psychology, Watson and so forth, yes, realists did start appealing to the stimulus reflex mechanisms and explaining the direct nature of sense awareness. So a sensation then is a sign that God has arranged we should get. A remembrance is a sign. You see, I'm remembering something. Something's coming back, I say, to my mind. Coming back? It's a sign that there is something there to come back. And spontaneously I respond and affirm what I remember. And an imagination, what you know is simply imagination, is a sign, knowing it's something you're imagining, it's a sign that there is nothing there that you're believing. So that when I talk about my fairy giraffes with butterfly wings, you see, knowing that that's an imaginary kind of specimen, you don't take it as an indication of a material object. You take it as an indication of Holmes' crazy ideas. Nothing but that. Well, then, it's due to human constitution as a whole, and it's common to all human beings, not a result of reasoning processes that we have these natural beliefs. Now, these Scottish realists were, not surprisingly, Scottish Presbyterians. And their theism comes out in the ways I've indicated. But I'm interested to find a parallel kind of statement, not identical, but a parallel statement in John Calvin. And I don't want to suggest that Thomas Reid had read the same edition of Calvin's Institutes that I happen to read, or even that he had noted this passage in his own edition of Calvin's Institutes. But listen to it and you'll note the similarity. This is John Calvin. The manifold agility of the soul, which enables it to take a survey of heaven and earth, to join past to present, to retain the memory of things heard long ago, to conceive of whatever it chooses by the help of imagination. You see, there's perception, surveying heaven and earth, memory, things long ago, now imagination. And its ingenuity in the invention of such admirable arts, and he goes on to name some, are certain proofs of the divinity in man. In other words, human nature, the way we're made, provides evidence of a creator giving us these proclivities. So while Calvin takes this as evidence for the existence of God, Reid, dealing with epistemology, taking the existence of God as the given, finds there the justification for natural beliefs. Okay? I might say that when you get to the 20th century, people like G.E. Moore, there's no theistic justification. G.E. Moore remains sort of agnostic religiously. Okay, so theory of ideas, natural beliefs. Let me pause there for a moment. Comment? Feedback? Yeah, Troy.
I'm wondering about Hume's two views of the self and Reid's criticism.
Two views on?
Of the self, the inconsistency
Oh,
of
yeah.
the self, the
Yeah.
loss of perception, the antagonism. I'm wondering if there's some sort of order that Hume perceives in this bundle of perception rather than, and I'm wondering if maybe, this is really reaching, but I'm wondering if Whitehead has to deal with the same problem if he does so through the process rather than...
Yeah, yeah. One, Hume does not, that I recall, talk about the inner order of this bundle of perceptions. No. His language is simply that of